Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our very good friend, Sam Clement, and as well as Courtney Trush. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hey, John.
Hey, guys. Listen, I'm doing fantastic, but I do have a sense of angst here this week. And that angst is that I'm going to have to get all new appliances. Sam, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about.
I do too, John.
Well, okay. Well, thank you for that, Courtney. But Sam, it's one of those things. I'm sitting around looking at my gas furnace. I'm looking at my gas stove, looking at my gas hot water heaters. You start adding it all up. I use a lot of gas, which sounds kind of funny. But Courtney, I'm sitting here looking at it going, my gosh, if the administration has its way, I'm going to have to buy a couple of furnaces. I'm going to have to buy a couple of hot water heaters. I'm going to have to buy a new stove. And I'm just going to have to get used to an all-electric life. That sounds pretty expensive to me. What do you think?
I would question, obviously, the motives, and then curious on if there are any power companies lobbying to support this action, because they would be reaping the benefits of everything going to electric for sure.
Well, I would say, and this is where I've done the math. Sam, you know I'm a nerd when it comes to stuff like this. Don't agree? Don't.
I just said okay.
Yeah, okay. That's not really an agreement, is it?
No.
Okay, fine, fair enough. I actually did the math with it, and you would think that maybe a Duke Power or Southern Company or Con Ed or people like that would be going, hey, this is fantastic. However, the amount of the electrical demand that we would have would swamp our ability to be able to meet it. For instance,
wow.
I've done the math, not surprisingly, and I'm going to assume that there are 131,200,000 households in the United States. According to most estimates that I've read, about 38% of them use a gas stove.
That's pretty low.
Well, it's pretty low, but that still equals into 49,856,000. The average gas stove uses 1,022 kilowatts worth of electricity each year. So changing all those into electric stove, drum roll please, will require that we have an additional, that can't be right, 50,953,000,000 kilowatts of electricity, and that's just our gas stoves. Our hot water heaters, most people do use electric for that. If we go to all electric, we're going to need to have, that can't be right, an additional 113,357,000,000 kilowatts generated. And then there's the furnaces.
It's a lot.
48% of our homes use a natural gas furnace. Up in the Northeast, they use heating oil and what have you, and electric. So in order to do that, the average furnace uses 9,490 kilowatts per year. So, my goodness, drum roll, in order to change all of our furnaces into electric, 597,642,000,000 kilowatt hours. Add that all up, Sam, Courtney, that works into 761,900,000,000 and some odd million kilowatts.
I don't have any concept of what
to put that into perspective.
Right.
That works out obviously at about 762 gigawatts, which is about what Brazil generates every year. So we would need to tack that onto what we're currently doing. Add to that, Sam, the additional 500,000 gigawatts that the feds want us to do, to shifting to 54% electronic vehicles by 2030, and we're going to have to generate an additional 1.4 gigawatts worth of power. Unfortunately, Courtney, we only generate around 4.3 trillion gigawatts now. In any event, we will have to increase our electrical output well in excess of 25%.
And that's before even adding on all the lawnmowers and tractors that California is pushing to be all electric before.
Before
2030?
Before all that time. So in other words, we're going to have to increase our electrical capacity, I would say conservatively, between 25 and 30% in order to get all the administration's mandates taken care of. And from where is that going to come, Sam?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Courtney, what do you think?
Well, I don't think that we would be able to I'm sure we could figure it out, but that doesn't seem like the long-term solution. I do wonder about the motives. In reading actually the Consumer Product and Safety
Okay, wait a second. Before Courtney goes on any further, worry about the motives. This is the point in the program where we do point out that any views which may be construed as political in nature are certainly those of the people speaking from trading perspectives, and not necessarily those of Oakworth Capital Bank any of its other associates or shareholders or stakeholders. Courtney, please, by all means, shoot away.
I feel like you always have to do the disclaimer after I start talking.
Just don't know where you're going to go with
Yes,
it.
well, neither do I. I just winging it. No, I mean, they wrote specifically that, if you had continued exposure to these gas fumes, that it could create acute, chronic bronchitis and certain things that they were concerned about. We have a gas stove. Now, when we had to replace our stove, they said that the actual stove itself could not be gas, but that the burners on the top of the stove, the eyes, that could be gas. So ours is actually half gas, half electric.
You just have a gas stove and an electric starter. That's what you have.
No, but the actual, there's no flame. We used to have
There's no flame.
In the in the oven, there used to be a flame in our old one that was 100% gas, but they don't make those anymore.
I wasn't aware of this. Were you aware of this?
No, mine's 100% electric or 100% gas, but
I
it's
got-
also probably a little dated.
Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, I've got an electric stovetop, and I'd love to get rid of that and get a gas stovetop.
I love our gas stove.
I can't cook on electric. It's tough.
Well, guess what?
And most
You've learned how.
kitchens,
Now,
most
your
kitchens,
administration
yeah.
wants you
Yeah.
to do so.
Well, and I think that's part of it. And then, you were talking about the new thing right now is to get a tankless water heater. And when you get a tankless water heater, it's on natural gas.
Of course.
Our generator is on natural gas.
Yes.
So, I mean, to me, I'm you would think that the gas companies would also be very interested in this legislation. And obviously, to your point, it was, the House already passed a bill to block, the ban on gas stoves.
Well, the thing is, I mean,
The states can still.
the
Yes.
states can do
Yep.
whatever they want, and they can put themselves out of business if they want. I mean, the truth is, just to get to where the administration wants to go with its electric vehicles, by 2030, I think it's from 7% currently, 8% currently, to 54% in 7 years. We're going to have to generate an additional 560 some odd thousand gigawatts worth of power. That's a lot, and in order to use that using solar power, if my math serves, and please, by all means, you can go to our website, oakworthcapital.com, take a look underneath trading perspectives, and this is from the April 14th Common Sense that we did the math. So I'm going to be rounding. I'm going to be quoting myself and rounding a little bit. So that's a pretty dicey situation. In order to get the amount of increase in electrical capacity using solely solar power, just on electric cars, we would have to create another 176 solar panel farms, the size of the largest one currently existing in the United States. The land mass that it would require would take over both of the states of Vermont and New Hampshire. So,
Not much GDP comes out of this.
well, man, I'm sure those people probably wouldn't like it terribly much, turning their entire state into glass and copper. And plus, I think some of these things put off some pretty immense heat. And so if we were to do that, understanding that we're going to have to come up with another, essentially double that, we're going to need at least another Vermont and at least another New Hampshire, and probably a little bit more than, let's just make it all of New England. We're going to turn into a solar panel farm in order to get to the government's wishes in terms of no more gas furnaces, no more gas cars, no more gas anything, no more internal combustion engines for all intents and purposes. All of New England would be a solar panel farm. Sam, your thoughts on that?
I mean, that doesn't bother me as much as it would probably bother people from the Northeast. But I think
You think?
I think all of this, begs the question: at what point is government? They're arguing that it's for health purposes and for emissions purposes.
It's the
Right.
easiest way to try to sell your political agenda is to say it's for, one, the children, or two, for health purposes. And maybe I should have used that caveat against myself. Courtney, your thoughts?
Yeah, or to Sam's point when he's sitting there talking about greenhouse emissions, you're looking at this awful weather that we're having, more flooding, more more intense storms, all of that.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Well, and people are associating so that it's the fear tactic of we need to do, and to me it's very reactive rather than saying, okay, well, are we, to your point, I mean, if only so many households out of the entire U.S. are using gas stoves, is that really the best means that we need to tackle this right now versus saying
Listen,
let's look at cars?
We've got plenty of other things we need to tackle besides that.
Right.
And that's just households. It doesn't include all the gas stoves that are
Restaurants.
used at restaurants or commissaries or any of the HVAC or cooling systems that are used in commercial real estate. Any of the hot water heaters there. I mean, we add it really all up. If we get rid of all this stuff, we're going to have to come up with a whole bunch of electricity, and really the most cost-effective way of generating that amount of capacity in the electrical grid is by using what, Sam?
Gas.
That's right, natural gas. Yes, it's cheapest, most efficient way.
Cheap, it's extremely efficient.
Well, and think
so-
about
so
all the
we would be-
materials, like, to your point, like these industrial air conditioning units and all of the stoves that now are just going to be wasted when they were perfectly fine and
Oh no!
functioning.
Listen, of
You're
course,
looking at all the
Courtney.
waste, too.
But the thing is, we're going to need to come up with a lot of copper, and unfortunately, we don't produce that much copper in the United States. Top three copper producers in the world are Chile, Peru, and our friends the Chicoms over in China.
Oh,
Yeah,
It's the Chinese.
this is all China,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure, pushing
yeah,
it.
yeah.
The Chileans are having their own issues right now.
I mean,
too,
the guy wants to nationalize all the copper production, which will shut down on new capacity, because no one's going to invest if they can't keep their profits. And so, Sam, I mean, it kind of not just where's the electrical capacity going to come from all this, which is going to be very expensive for someone. It's where are we going to get the inputs in order to even think about putting up the capacity in the first place, let alone all the stuff that we will need for new appliances throughout the entire country.
Well, and
Where are we going to get it?
I don't know.
But if the concern is your health, right, that your potential exposure, should something be leaking or should it not be vented properly, then you could put some other mechanism versus having to take the oven completely out. So there
We could
is
just get out
carbon
of my
monoxide
house, get the
detectors.
government out of my
I'm
house.
going to
Well,
tell
yeah,
you
but-
this. I mean, gin martinis and nacho supremos are a far bigger threat to this man's health than the gas stove I've got. Your thoughts on that, Courtney?
I would probably agree with
Well,
that.
listen to this one. Well, you're right.
Well, more than just that. I mean, you think it. Well, I won't get into.
Yeah, please don't.
Yeah, but I was pulled an article about carbon monoxide detector requirements. We have them in our house, even though our house is very old, and it's not required in the state of Alabama. But there are 27 states and the District of Columbia that now require carbon monoxide detectors in homes. And I know, Sam, you said you don't even have a fire detector, so that seems really safe for you and Nana.
That's one of those ones. It's not necessarily a bad idea to have a carbon monoxide detector. I would say it's a good idea to have a carbon monoxide detector. One of those things.
Right.
And it's certainly to have a fire detector, what have you. I guess the question, this is where Sam and I are probably of the same mind, and Courtney, you might be a little bit different. Is it the government's responsibility to tell me what it thinks is best practice? I mean, that's fundamentally down to it. And that has changed dramatically in my life, where when I was a child, you would say, no, I don't want the government to tell me I need to have a carbon monoxide. I mean, it's none of their business. I mean, heck, I remember when all of a sudden seatbelts became mandatory. People were upset about that, let
Yeah.
alone drinking a beer in your car. My gosh, the rednecks went apoplectic over that. So it's like the government tells us all these things without a doubt, but at what point do you sit there and go, all right, guys, listen, that gas stove's really not hurting anyone all that much. And if you think I'm really going to die because of my gas stove, when I turn off the gas, guess what? I don't have any problems left. That type deal. If my furnace is going to kill me, it's something else is going to get me.
It seems like it's shifting a lot in terms of government trying to reach into consumer habits and consumer preferences more so than they had in the past. It seems like it's less about general safety, like you would argue a seatbelt or even drinking while you're driving is, or even a carbon monoxide detector, and more into the consumer preferences and what people want to spend their money on, trips you want to take, the cars you want to drive, things like that are less about, they're really the argument for it's for your own safety. It
doesn't hold water in my estimation whatsoever, because even with your electric appliances, I mean, that's more wiring that you've got to do. I mean, the furnace burns pretty hot. You could have an electrical fire in your house. Yeah, carbon monoxide. I mean, heck, anything can happen when you have things in your house that consume a lot of energy, whether or not it's natural gas or electricity. Something could go wrong.
Well, and I guess to your point that you made about drinking and driving, right? Drinking and driving puts you at risk.
You're not still doing that, are you?
Only occasionally. No, I'm just kidding.
You are?
But you put other people at risk, right?
Yes.
When you are required to have car insurance, you choose to drive the car. If you were to hit someone else, you need insurance to be able to cover the potential risk to someone else.
Externalities.
Right.
Yeah. I like it.
Now, for the seatbelt, I would say the seatbelt is something that would be primarily the people in the car, right? Like it's protecting you. It's not necessarily the worry of someone else outside of the vehicle. But when you talk about carbon monoxide or any type of gas and killing that's a unit. It's not, you can determine, to Sam's point, he can determine whether or not he has a fire detector. Now, if he goes to sell his house, he's going to have to install one because it is a requirement and will probably come up in his...
I bought mine without one.
Well, that's, I don't know
Did you
about
put one
your...
up?
No.
I mean, it's at $15. You can throw a couple on the wall. They're not that difficult. He'll do that. But
I'm pretty sure that if you
some
had
broker will probably
somebody-
tell you it would be a good idea.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you have to go to ADT and get a whole new one.
Yeah.
No. Well, all that to be said, like, you can make that decision because you are in that dwelling and it's not going to affect
Dwelling.
if you have a single home that's not attached to others. And I guess what I'm saying here is, like, I do...
That doesn't count.
Yeah, the old townhome.
well, I think that there are requirements of townhomes that you have to follow certain things. But, I just think it's interesting... To your point, the overreaching, I do think that there is a need for the government to inform general constituents and to make sure, because some people just are not going to have that knowledge base of knowing what is dangerous. But it should be up to you, if it's your dwelling, your home, whether or not you're going to put it in there, because you're not affecting anyone else by
I think
having carbon
all of that
monoxide.
is just... The flaw in all of that is we're taking the government at their word that that's the reason why
right,
they want
and
to ban
thinking that
gas
their
stoves.
intentions are pure.
And when the thing about it is, and going back to some of the Pew Research articles, which I guess the Trust in Institutions one should be coming out really any day. You know that survey I'm talking about, don't you, Sam?
I don't know.
Well, it comes through and it quizzes people on, it's the small business,
Oh, yeah.
that one. Boy, I did a great job explaining that.
Yeah, you
didn't
did.
I certainly did. And anyway, there's some research that'll be coming out this summer, just how much faith U.S. citizens have in their various institutions. And this is where perhaps, particularly people in the Deep South perhaps feel a little bit more jaundiced, because right now, respect for the Congress is what? In the 20s?
Yeah.
Respect for the presidency is upper 30s?
Yeah.
Respect for the bureaucracy would probably be the same as Congress. So these people are telling us this information, these institutions that no one really has any trust in any longer, truthfully. So do you really believe what they have to say? Do you really believe that there's not an agenda behind it? And you sit there and say, okay, well, this is how much carbon monoxide. Well, how many people died this past year because of carbon monoxide, from the furnace,
Right.
relative to something being electrocuted or something like that.
And this other argument being the emissions side of it. I mean, I've seen stats about, the top shipping vessels on Earth put out more emissions than, like, all the U.S. cars in a certain period of time.
Well, we can talk about volcanoes. We can talk about
there's
any
just
number of
right.
things.
So again, it kind of begs the question: what's the real purpose?
Yeah, and what's interesting is that the recent bill, H.R. 1615, that passed this week, passed by 248 to 180 votes, and 29 of that 248 were Democrats. The representative that sponsored the bill, Kelly Armstrong, stated, "The goal is to dictate how you live every aspect of your life, how you save and invest for future by pushing ESG, how you drive by banning gas-powered cars, and now the goal is to control how you cook."
I think they truly do think there are people in Washington that honestly do believe that this is the best policy. It's not necessarily just trying to control how I cook, but it's just like, we've got to do this in order to save the planet. And I would say, listen, if that is your thought process, I'm not going to be able to change it. I get it.
Right.
I get it. That's where your heart is. However, from purely economic lens, doing all this stuff in order to get to this level of utopia. One, it's not feasible, and then two, there's no way we're doing it without natural gas.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like we're just going to be using more natural gas in the production of electricity as opposed to anything else. So we're not getting away from it.
No.
It's too cheap and too abundant, natural gas.
And efficient.
And efficient. It burns hot. I mean,
It's awesome.
it's relatively clean. I mean, there's no way you can generate electricity without there being some sort of negative impact to the environment. I'm sorry. The only sure way of getting rid of man's impact on the environment is to get rid of man. There, I've said it.
I like it.
And however, we can.
I don't like it,
Yeah, I don't like it. We can talk about electricity and turning all this electricity. The power still has to come from somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, so do you want solar panels the size of New England? Do you want wind farms the size of Montana? Do we want to put wind farms out in the middle of the ocean that kill whales? That's a thing I've heard.
I'd vote for nuclear reactors everywhere.
Okay, we move on down to Dothan where they've got
Yeah.
one, really right nearby. Or do we want to do it with natural gas? And I just don't see us getting away from fossil fuels any time
No.
soon.
No.
If ever, and that could be a Luddite in that regard. But you think about pulling, gas out of the ground, how cheap it is, how easy it is to move around for all intents and purposes, and how hot it burns. We're wishful thinking.
Yep.
Doing this other stuff. Courtney, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think you look at, and I know we've talked about this before, whether you do, okay, we're going to do the wind power. Well, that kills birds. Okay, well, now you're going to, there's always.
Well, listen, all that metal has to come from somewhere. The
Right,
rare
the
earths
metal,
and magnets
and then, there's
the
gonna-
copper. It's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, and there's going to be lasting effects. And I think, I don't know the numbers, and I mean, I know, John, you have probably like a general idea of just random facts, but like.
Rolling your eyes at me.
But I can't pull a number of how many people die in car accidents every year. But carbon monoxide poisoning, which is, that's kind of what I'm relating to the gas exposure. They say is the second most common cause of non-medical poisoning death, according to the CDC.
Very niche group.
Yeah,
of
that
deaths.
really is.
Yeah,
How many other causes are there? In that?
I don't know, but over 10,000 people are poisoned by carbon monoxide, need medical treatment each year, and more than 438 people in the U.S. die annually from carbon monoxide poisoning.
438.
Yeah, I hate to say that those don't matter, but
so we're gonna upend our entire electrical grid
Right.
and change the way that tens of millions of people live for 438 deaths.
right.
For a point.
And we're not saying that those deaths don't matter; they do matter,
1%
but
of our population.
Again, I view the world with the economic lens, and obviously the return on investment here doesn't make a lot of sense. But
Yeah.
but I can't argue with people that are thinking more with their heart than their heads, and I understand that. We just we have to be realistic about things at times, and all this stuff is not, in my estimation, and it's my estimation alone, economically feasible given the current state of affairs. With that, guys, we always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more, hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, you can always go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab and find all kinds of exciting information, including links to previous Trading Perspectives podcasts, as well as links to previous blog posts, also known as Common Sense, as well as other great stuff. With that, I'm going to give you guys a last chance to have the last word on this exciting topic.
That's all I got.
that's it, John.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.